On September 15, 2008, a 15-8-year-old institution that had survived the Great Depression, World War II, and the dot-com crash simply stopped existing. 25,000 employees lost their jobs overnight. Retirement accounts evaporated. And across the Atlantic, the Bank of England had to intervene to prevent a run on British banks. All because of a single decision by regulators to let one firm fail. The firm was Lehman Brothers. And here is the detail that still keeps investigators awake at night. The entire collapse was avoidable. Welcome to Crime Decoded. I'm Mark.
And I'm Dr. Sophie. Mark, where does this case begin?
It begins in 2007, but really it begins much earlier. Lehman Brothers was not a fly-by-night operation. This was a firm that traced its roots to a dry goods store, opened in Montgomery, Alabama in 1850. By the time I started my career in the 80s, Lehman was synonymous with Wall Street power. It had weathered market crashes, world wars, regulatory changes. The partners at Lehman genuinely believed they were too smart, too established, too important to fail.
And that belief is itself a psychological vulnerability we should name up front. What you are describing, Mark, is the overconfidence effect. It is a well-documented cognitive bias, where people overestimate their own abilities, their control over outcomes, and their invulnerability to failure. The higher you rise in an institution, the more pronounced this effect becomes. And when an entire leadership team shares the same overconfidence, it creates what psychologists call groupthink. Dissenting voices are silenced not by force, but by social pressure. The people who see the cracks stop speaking because everyone else insists the foundation is solid.
And that is exactly what happened inside Lehman. The man at the center was Richard Fuld, the CEO. He had been at the firm since 1969. He had built it into a powerhouse. He was known internally as the gorilla because he was aggressive, intimidating, and fiercely protective of the firm. And he genuinely believed that his strategy of taking on enormous risk in mortgage-backed securities was not just sound, but brilliant.
Now, we should be careful here. This is not about villainizing one individual. The psychology we are analyzing is systemic. Richard Fuld was not a lone fraudster like Bernie Madoff, who deliberately and knowingly stole money. Fuld was a risk-taker, operating inside a system that rewarded risk-taking. The question we need to answer is, at what point did aggressive strategy cross the line into something that could be described as criminal negligence or fraud?
And that is exactly the question prosecutors asked after the collapse. They spent years investigating, and they found evidence of something specific, something called Repo 105.
Repo 105. For our listeners who have never heard of this term, explain it to us like we are sitting in a precinct briefing.
All right. A repo, short for repurchase agreement, is a standard Wall Street transaction. One party sells an asset to another party with a promise to buy it back later, usually the next day at a slightly higher price. It functions like a short-term loan. Banks use repos all the time to manage their cash flow. They are legal, they are common, and they are normally transparent.
So what made Repo 105 different?
A number. Repo 105 meant that Lehman was agreeing to buy back the asset at a price that was 105% of its original sale price. That extra 5% is the key. Under standard accounting rules, a repo transaction is recorded as a financing arrangement, meaning the asset stays on the bank's balance sheet. But if the repo exceeds a certain threshold, it can be classified as a sale, meaning the asset comes off the balance sheet entirely. Lehman structured their repos to hit exactly that threshold. They sold assets, took the cash, used that cash to pay down other debts, and then at the end of the quarter, their balance sheet showed dramatically less debt than they actually carried. After the reporting period ended, they borrowed the money back and repurchased the assets.
So they were using a legal accounting mechanism to temporarily make their debt disappear. It is the financial equivalent of cleaning your house before the inspector arrives and shoving everything into a closet. The inspector sees a clean living room. The closet is full.
That is exactly the analogy I use. And Lehman did this on a staggering scale. According to the bankruptcy examiner's report, Lehman used Repo 105 transactions to remove approximately $50 billion from its balance sheet at the end of the first quarter of 2008. 50 billion. That number is not a rounding error. That number was roughly equivalent to the entire GDP of a small country.
And here's where the psychology gets more interesting. The accountants at Lehman, who executed these transactions, knew they were aggressive. They documented their concerns internally. We know this because evidence emerged during the investigation showing that Lehman's own auditors questioned the structure of these deals. But the decision to proceed came from the highest level of the firm. So the question becomes, what were the external checks and balances that should have caught this?
There were two. The first was Lehman's external auditor, Ernst & Young. They signed off on the financial statements that used these transactions. The bankruptcy examiner later concluded that Ernst & Young had a colorable claim for malpractice, meaning there was enough evidence to suggest they should have flagged the transactions. The second check was the regulatory system itself. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, had oversight of Lehman, and the SEC had access to Lehman's internal data. But here is the critical detail. The SEC did not examine Lehman's liquidity or its use of repos as a priority. They were focused on other metrics.
So what we are seeing is not a single failure, but a cascade of failures. The internal culture at Lehman silenced dissent. The external auditors failed to challenge aggressive accounting. The regulators had the tools, but not the focus. And every layer of the system relied on the assumption that someone else was watching.
And here is the detail that changes everything about how we understand this case. In March 2008, just 6 months before the collapse, Bear Stearns, another major investment bank, failed and was acquired by J.P. Morgan Chase in a fire sale. The Federal Reserve backed that transaction. They provided financial support to make it happen. Every major Wall Street banker watched that rescue and drew a specific conclusion. The government will not let a big bank fail. They believed they were protected.
That is a textbook example of moral hazard. It is a concept from economics and psychology, where knowing that someone will rescue you from the consequences of your own risky behavior actually encourages more risky behavior. It is the same mechanism that causes someone to drive faster when they are wearing a seatbelt. The safety measure reduces the perceived risk, so the actual risk-taking increases. And at Lehman and across Wall Street, the bailout of Bear Stearns functioned exactly like that seatbelt. It made everyone feel safer, so they drove faster.
And the government knew this. When Lehman started to show signs of distress in the summer of 2008, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department had a choice. They could rescue Lehman the way they rescued Bear Stearns, or they could let it fail to send a message. They chose to let it fail, and they believed they had contained the damage. They believed the financial system was strong enough to absorb the shock.
And they were wrong.
They were catastrophically wrong. When Lehman filed for bankruptcy on September 15, 2008, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped over 500 points. It was the largest single-day point drop since the September 11th attacks. The Reserve Primary Fund, a money market fund that held Lehman debt, broke the buck, meaning its net asset value fell below $1 per share, which triggered a run on money market funds across the country. Within days, the credit markets froze. Banks stopped lending to each other because no one knew who else was holding bad debt. The global financial system came within hours of a complete meltdown.
And from a forensic psychology perspective, this is the moment where the analysis shifts from understanding the criminals to understanding the system itself. Because the same cognitive biases that operated inside Lehman also operated inside the Federal Reserve, inside the Treasury, and inside every major financial institution worldwide. They all suffered from the same overconfidence. They all believed the system was more resilient than it actually was.
And that brings us to the part of this case that I, as a detective, find most infuriating. The investigation after the collapse revealed that Lehman's internal risk management team had flagged the excessive use of repos. They had written reports, they had presented data, and they were overruled by senior management. But here is what the public does not always understand. Those internal warnings were not secret. They were available to the board of directors, and the board chose not to act.
Let me name the specific psychological mechanism at work there. It is called diffusion of responsibility. In a hierarchy, When a problem is raised to a higher authority and that authority does not act, the original person who raised the concern often feels that they have done their duty. They reported it. They are not responsible for what happens next, and the higher authority, the board, believes that because the issue was raised by a specialized department, the experts have handled it. Everyone assumes someone else is carrying the ball, and the ball drops.
And the ball dropped on the entire global economy. The aftermath was brutal. Unemployment in the United States doubled from 5% to 10%. Household wealth in America declined by $16 trillion. And across Europe, the crisis triggered sovereign debt problems that nearly caused the collapse of the Eurozone. All of this traceable back, in part, to an accounting trick designed to hide $50 billion in debt.
Now, I want to pause here because this is the point in the episode where we shift from analysis to awareness. Mark, what are the specific warning signs that an ordinary person, not a forensic accountant, not an SEC regulator, can look for in a financial institution where they have their money?
3 things. First, complexity. If a financial institution's business model is so complicated that a smart person cannot understand how they make money, that is a red flag. Lehman's use of repos was not inherently illegal, but it was deliberately complex. Complexity is often a tool to hide risk.
That is an excellent point, and it connects to a psychological principle called the fluency heuristic. People trust things that feel easy to understand and distrust things that feel difficult. But sophisticated fraud operators know this, so they deliberately make their operations complex to exploit that hesitation. If you cannot understand it, do not invest in it.
Second, look at the leadership culture. Is there a single dominant figure who brooks no dissent? Richard Fuld was notorious for firing or marginalizing anyone who questioned his strategy. In any organization where the leader cannot be challenged, the risk of catastrophic failure is dramatically higher.
And that is not just a financial insight. It applies to any high-stakes environment. In the cockpit, we call it captainitis. Junior crew members hesitate to correct a captain who is making an obvious error because of the power differential. The result is plane crashes. The same psychological dynamic destroyed Lehman.
And third, watch for what I call the last mile problem. Lehman's risk management team identified the danger, the external auditors had concerns, the SEC had the data, but at every step, the final action, the last mile of actually stopping the behavior, never happened. If you are investing in a company or trusting an institution with your savings, ask yourself, who in this system has the actual authority to stop something dangerous, and have they ever used it?
That is remarkably practical advice, and it brings us back to the core lesson of this case. The Lehman Brothers collapse was not a mystery. It was not a black swan event that no one could have predicted. It was a predictable failure of human psychology operating inside a broken system. The accounting trick was the mechanism, but the psychology was the cause.
I have investigated a lot of cases in my career, Sophie. Murders, frauds, organized crime. And I can tell you that the most dangerous criminals are not the ones with guns. They are the ones who sit in boardrooms, sign documents, and convince themselves that what they are doing is not really a crime. Richard Fuld went to Congress after the collapse and testified under oath that he did not believe Lehman had taken excessive risks. He said it with total conviction. That is the part that still does not sit right with me. I do not know if he was lying to Congress or lying to himself. Either way, he believed his own story.
And that is the psychological phenomenon we call self-deception. It is the single most powerful tool in the criminal's mental toolkit, because if you truly believe you have done nothing wrong, you will never confess, you will never change, and you will never stop. The Lehman case did not end with justice. No senior executive at Lehman was ever convicted of a crime. A few civil settlements were paid, but no one went to prison. And that is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth this case reveals. Sometimes the system is so intertwined with the psychology it is meant to police that it cannot see the crime even when it is standing in the middle of it.
That is why we do this podcast. Not for the shock value, not to glorify criminals, but because understanding the psychology, the systems, and the warning signs is the only way to protect ourselves and the people we care about. If this episode changed the way you think about the institutions you trust, share it with someone. That is the point.
And if you want to keep decoding these cases with us, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New episodes drop every day. Mark, what is our next case?
Next time, we are going inside a case that combines finance and human psychology in a way that most people still find hard to believe. A fraud that operated for decades, hidden in plain sight, because the victims did not want to see it.
Until then, keep watching the signs. This is Crime Decoded.